I had a totally incorrect idea. I thought today was to make me happy, because it's fun to see what people are doing with ideas. And really that's, as I said to you, I should have retired by now, but that's why I'm still here, because I'm interested to know what people are going to do with ideas. Now, there's some of the ideas, that there are 4 kinds of behaviour patterns you can focus on with children, and each one requires a different kind of response in order to get them responsible, ultimately, if you're lucky. Okay, so that's sort of the background. And when you come to the specifics, everything that's covered today in a way should fall under some of these sort of ideas, I guess. There's nothing there that should be new to you, I think. If you need explanation of any of those, just ask. But basically, these are just parts and parcel of what we've been going through with the project, followed by... Some of these are harder than others. What I'm doing now is looking at the results of previous study of 8 secondary schools and the things they said were hard to do and why they were hard, and if they're doing them at all. The reality is, after a year, they're not, on average. They think they are in some cases, but the student data doesn't support it either. So it's going to be very interesting to figure out exactly what's going on. And to do that, I'm going to show you something interesting. I said I'd report these. By the way, I hope some people have brought questionnaires in their own schools, if you remembered. If not, I would love to get them before the break, because then I can work on them over the break. At the moment, I'm just reporting on 213 exit forms. Okay? So they were asked why they've been told to leave. They asked in the form I sent you, why are you asked to leave? I did a factor analysis on those responses to see if there was any naturally occurring groupings. I thought there would be groupings like, I interfered with learning, I made someone feel uncomfortable, I took on the teacher, I failed to engage in curriculum, and it was somebody else's fault. The teacher's to blame, he hates me or she hates me. So what happened was, that's not how it came out. The way it came out was, the first dimension, which I had to call take responsibility, had all of this in it. In the process of trying to write this stuff up now. Basically, it's got everything there that says I did something myself. So there's a sense of taking responsibility for why you were sent out in all of those. I had expected them to break up, they did not. The other factor, there's only 2 factors, and that's all. And it's obvious what's going on there. So they were the first sort of finding, if you like. Now, I've since modified that, and I've sent you a modified version because I need a stronger teacher's fault dimension. So I've added a couple of extra items there. Hopefully they'll be very useful scales. And I can get a sense of if children are taking responsibility over the 4 years of the project, let's say. They should be. What you notice first is that the 2 scales were negative related. This is not a big surprise, although they weren't strongly negatively related. I thought there'd be a strong relationship between, if you blame the teacher, you don't take responsibility. If you take responsibility, you don't blame the teacher. In fact, there are a number of people who wouldn't take responsibility and wouldn't blame the teacher. I don't know what they were thinking. I need to do some qualitative work, obviously, and that tells me. But generally, there is a relationship, which is significant, that the people who take more responsibility are less likely to blame teachers, and the people who thought the teacher was picking on them were less likely to take responsibility. On average, I've called them disagreeable because they basically disagree with both scales on average. So there's no reason they were sent out, it seems. None of these things seem to explain it. So whether they just were so annoyed at the time they were asked to do this thing, they just went, no, 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 no. I haven't got any idea why that is. It'll be worth finding out. I mean, I might get that from you. You may have sat with kids when you asked them these questions. These are secondary, though. First thing I noticed was that only 32% of these forms indicated there was a consequence prior to the exit. Now, that's their perception. It's not the reality, necessarily. But it certainly doesn't fit with a series of consequences. 54% of these people said they got 1 consequence of the 66 forms. That's why I need many more, because the power of these tests is not great, although the relationship makes sense. But it means there are not many people at this point in those schools who are making it clear to the kid that there are intermediate steps before they're being sent out. I don't know what the reality is. But, however, those who did receive intermediate steps were the ones who were taking responsibility. So that backs up the sort of data, that backs up the sort of argument of the program, that if there are intermediate steps, I can now say kids who are sent out are more likely to take responsibility. So it doesn't just sound like a good idea, it seems to be a good idea in terms of the outcomes. And the more punishments they got, the more the responsibility they took. There was a linear relationship. So if you give them 2 chances, up to 3, 96%. No, very few people went over 3 or saw the kids saw over 3. So that backs up 3 steps. Now, those who received an explanation, it said, did the teacher explain why you had to leave, were more likely to take responsibility and less likely to blame the teacher. So clearly, however, only 48% said they were given an explanation as why they had to leave. This is in secondary. I think it'd be much stronger in primary, but these are from secondary schools that have already started on this project. 70% of these people had been asked to leave on a prior occasion, and 33% of those had had a follow-up discussion, just a third. When I showed this to some secondary teachers, they said, "That's fantastic." And I said, no, I didn't think it was fantastic at all. I wanted everyone to have a follow-up discussion. And now I've got reason to say it, because the ones who had a follow-up discussion took greater responsibility on this, which is the next occasion. So had they had a discussion, even a bad one it seems, because I now can distinguish between good and bad discussions, even if they'd had a discussion of any kind, they're more likely to be taking responsibility this time. Okay, now, if in those discussions they focused on these things, and you notice the figures aren't high, but then, you know, a lot of kids don't make other people feel uncomfortable, but 55% of those discussions did focus on stopping kids learning, then they took more responsibility for the next exit. Doesn't mean they weren't exited again, it didn't stop them, but it means they were more likely. And over time, that's a theory, over time they're either a C or a D. And if they're a C, they will come around, I hope. That's the thing we'll know in 4 years. Those who are less likely to take responsibility said the teacher just told them off, and that's 63%. So if they're just told off, even though they've had a discussion, and discussion in general is a good thing, there are good discussions and bad discussions, it would seem, in terms of them taking responsibility. So it's backing up the sort of processes I've been pushing for. They are less likely to blame their teacher when a reason was given, and when the follow-up discussion focused on the fact that they should see they had done the wrong thing and encourage them to engage in a better plan. So again, backing up the sort of stuff we've been pushing in the skill training. But as I say, the numbers aren't large enough, and I'm just waiting to get enough of these things to compare primary, secondary, and to get more confidence in these sort of results, because they're not going to print. Because there's very little out there on the empirical impact. Now, this is a perception of kids, I understand. It may not be accurate, but it's certainly part of the game. I mean, they're the ones we're working with. It's their perceptions that filter everything. So in summary, that's it. I can now say, empirically, with a small sample, that if reasons are given for the exit, if you want kids to take responsibility for their misbehaviour and they are exited, give a reason, prior punishments, follow-up discussion, and in those discussions focus on the impact of the learning or comfort of other students, and it would seem they will take more responsibility the next time they're exited, and hopefully there will eventually no longer be a next time that you have to exit them. So that's where we're at, and that's sort of what I'm trying to encourage within the thing, and now I'm going to hear what's happening, and I'm really very curious to know what's happening. So I won't take any more time. I'm trying to stick to time because it's really important today.